You have the first one? You have actually both of them. Go ahead.
So my first discussion item is about foundational reading skills. And just by way of a little bit of background, I want to share these documents with you. Even though this is not the real topic of the conversation, the document being shared is from the Linguistic Society of America and their resolution on the Oakland School District's Ebonics issue 2 decades ago. The reason that I bring this up is because what I want people to understand is that what the linguists call African American English is a language, and what I realized that that we are not, in my opinion, paying enough attention to is, as we have the support systems for children whose home language is Spanish, to teach them to be bilingual and speak in what I'm going to call book language. We don't do the same thing for children whose home language is Ebonics or African American English. I don't have any need or desire to walk down the path that the Oakland School District went through, where everybody interpreted that they wanted to have students taught in Ebonics. What I want is for us to put our money where it's most important, and that is in the foundational reading skills. I believe a huge part of the gap that we have in reading is because we are not addressing this issue. And what brought it home to me was in working with a student who's was supposed to spell them, T-H-E-M, and he spelled dem, D-E-M. And when I asked what was the word you heard, them or dim, he knew he heard them, but he translated it into his home language in his head before he spelled it. There is nothing wrong with his home language, which is why I passed this out, because I want that to be clear. But I think that we have got to address these issues around phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, and so forth, right? This impacts a lot of our kids, not just African American children, right? These are the issues that the dyslexia advocates come and scream at us about, right? And so my request is that the board discuss philosophically having our budget reflect our belief that we have to invest in the foundational reading skills. The examples I put just as a starting point for discussion is to have academic tutors, ideally in all the K-3 classrooms in Title I schools, so that the young people can get more face-to-face, very small group instruction around these foundational reading issues. Possibly reading recovery, which has a long history of great success, but we have never in this district truly funded it because it's expensive and requires a lot of staff training. Then there's a program called Mind Play, which is web-based that is supposed to work on the same thing. I'm not saying these are the answers. I'm saying that we have got to, instead of wringing our hands and bemoaning the fact that our children are not reading the way we want, and it's all groups. Our white children, our white non-free and reduced lunch students are not reading at the level I think they should. We are not doing a good enough job, in my opinion, on this very important, critical issue. And I think it starts with those foundational phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, the whole phonics. The old school educators keep saying, are you guys teaching phonics? And the answer is, yeah, kind of, sort of. I'm saying we need to put our money where our belief system is. And so my request is that we look at having future conversation with staff so the board can say, I hope, that we want to shift resources into those foundational reading skills. Done.
Mrs. Whitfield.
Thank you. I was just going to say it's interesting that you bring this up today, because I just visited with a couple of schools yesterday, the day before, that both principals requested more support for reading for their younger grades. Their reason being that their grades have gone down, and it's really tied into their ability of their children to read, and they feel that they would like more support on both of those items. The other thing I kept bringing up, reading recovery, but I couldn't remember the second word. I was like, it's a reading something. So I finally called Mr. Oswald and got the name from him. But it is a very intense program now that I understand it better, and how they can put so much time for the teachers into it. So, but they really do need an additional staff person to be able to take on something like that. So I think if our principals are asking for it and they see the need for it, I think that's really, really backs up your comments and your suggestions. The only question I would have is that we are approving a budget. Should we be thinking about this for this year? Because is it too late for something like that to happen? And how would we fit this in sooner than later? Because I do think, we are trying to get the grades up for this year, and I would love to give support to our principals if we can.
Mrs. Brill?
Thank you. And so I don't feel that I'm qualified to tell staff what programs we should be using, but I'd like to hear I'd like to have a workshop and find out what are we doing for foundational reading skills, and at least be informed as to what's going on rather than direct staff to do certain things. You may very well be doing this. Yes, I hear we do need more reading support. I hear a lot of things that we need when I visit schools. So I would suggest we have a workshop and hear what we're actually doing in the schools.
Mrs. McQuinn?
I was going to request also that we have a specific to the primary grades reading. Clearly, third grade reading has been in the strategic plan. We are not where we need to be, even compared to some other urban districts. So for me, the sense of urgency needs to lie with that K2 reading to get them up to where they need to be. And I talked to Dr. Sheffield recently, actually probably her first day in her new job. I'm sure it seems to her like years now, but some of the principals had spoken to me about the primary grades reading program with concerns, and frankly, I'm not knowledgeable enough about exactly what their concerns were, but the elementary school principals who were very familiar with teaching children to read had some concerns, and I know that Dr. Sheffield has addressed them and has made adjustments. So I would like to I was going to request that we have a workshop, again, specific to those primary grades, and certainly to include third grade.
So ironically, Keith and I actually literally had this conversation this morning. And so as we think of our goals, future assessments of our curriculum, I agree, and we will do a workshop.
All right. Thank you. Dr. Robertson, you want to take the next one?
Okay. So also know that was about shifting money. So, okay, I'm done with that now. So the next one is to request to have the board to discuss. This really, I should have written it to say having a workshop that includes the applicant security check process. And so, I think that we need to look at our policy again. And one of the questions that I do want answered is, why do we let people start work before this background check comes back? So the request is for a workshop around these issues, but I just needed to get that out there while it's on my mind. That's if the board agrees to have such a workshop, then that's one of the questions I would want answered.
Thank you, and I agree. I'd like to have some discussion on this at some future meeting, because I would like us to figure out this expungement issue. If we have a child that is arrested for shoplifting when they're 13 years old, and then we tell them that they've got to disclose that, and if they fail to disclose that, we fire them. I just don't believe that's. I think our policy needs to be fixed so that children that did something when they were kids that wasn't a serious offense and then fail to ever mention it again when they're told it's expunged, and they shouldn't be penalized for failing to to say that the record was expunged when they've been told afterwards that they don't have to worry about that ever again because it's off the record. So we need to take a look at the policy and see what we should do about fixing issues like that also. So Dr. Fenoy, can you?
Yes, sir. We've actually, Ms. Rico and I have spoken about that. Dr. LaCava and I have spoken about that. So now that I understand that the policy has been in place since '96, and so it is time for us to review that. But I just want all of us to be mindful, of the realities of our practices and policies have been consistent for a long time, and also making sure that we're in alignment with all the other districts as it relates to this. But we're going to look at it. I think we should do the workshop, and then we'll, as a team, we'll look at what type of recommendations we can bring back to the board for consideration.
All right. Thank you. Any other comments?
And
Dr.
this
Robinson?
is Ms. Andrews. Okay.
Go ahead, Mrs. Andrews.
Yes, I concur with both of those recommendations, certainly the workshop, and I'm concerned about the juveniles. I do sit on the Juvenile Justice Board, but I'm also concerned that we have a way to orient people about the applicant security check process and to help them to understand that better, certainly really revising that whole form and finding a way that when we have people who have had issues or have issues or may not be aware of issues, there's a way we can actually find some time, some private time with them before they actually submit their application. So there's a lot of pieces of that. I've spent the time talking to Ms. Rico and Dr. LaCava, and we just really got to really redo that. It hasn't been done in a long time, as you've said. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Robinson?
Thank you. And you reminded me that, part of the issue with the expungement is, sealed and expungement, is that attorneys would tell their clients that you don't have to tell anybody about this, but that's always been wrong, at least in certain fields, like in medicine, that you would get a got you if you didn't disclose it. What I understand now, and I don't have my notes in front of me, is that there's been a law in place for the past number of years where even if you didn't get an attorney to seal and expunge, it is automatically sealed and expunged, I think by FDLE. So you can actually have your record sealed and expunged and not know it. But my request is that we also look at hosting another workshop some years ago, and Dr. Best will recall this, and so will Judge Crow, where we had a workshop, not a school board workshop, but it was a training session for community and school police and administrators that was called A Lifetime of Consequences. And it showed that when we, as people in the system, choose, in the instances where a student does something wrong, and we choose to walk them into the criminal justice system when we have a choice, because sometimes there's not a choice, but when you have a choice, the lifetime of consequences on that child because of the school district personnel's decision to enter them into the criminal justice system. I think that training was terrifically impactful. That is where I really learned to tell everybody, just disclose even if it was sealed and expunged, and then explain it. But I say all this to say, I think it's time for us to have another training on the lifetime of consequences, and especially since we have so many new officers, it would be fantastic to present that information to them. So,
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. All right, there's no other comments. Go ahead, Mrs. Andrews.
Yes, I do remember having one at Pahokee, and it was during the day. I think parents need to have this education just as well as students, because many times parents are the ones that know what happens to their children. And sometimes, based on their financial situations, kids may not always know all of the pieces of the puzzle. So parents need to be educated also.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Andrews. If there's no further discussion, we'll take a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. Shaw, second by Dr. Robinson. All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 7-0.